I'm Layne, Caterpillar's North American Waste Application Specialist. And today we're going to talk about our daily maintenance inspection on this D6XE. Why do we do a walk-around inspection? Well, number one, it's for safety, right? I want to catch a problem with my brakes, maybe a hydraulic line leaking, something like that. I want to catch before I go out and start operating this piece of equipment in the landfill. The second reason is to prolong the life of the machine. So once again, catching a small problem before it becomes a major issue. That is going to allow us to keep our maintenance costs lower and keep that machine running longer. Now, where do we start a walk-around inspection? Well, you know what? It really doesn't matter where you start the inspection, but what I request is that you do it the same place every time. So if you start at the rear of the machine, the right or left side of the machine, the front of the machine, doesn't matter, but do it that way every time. I'm left-handed, so I like the left front. So the first thing I'm going to do before I start my walk-around inspection is I'm going to walk over here to our ground level service center, and I'm going to reach up and I'm going to turn that disconnect switch off to make sure that there's no power to this machine while I'm walking around doing my walk-around inspection. If a machine were to have the disconnect key in it, I would shut that disconnect key off. I would pull the key out. I'd put it in my pocket. I would claim that machine so nobody could start it while I'm over on the other side. Now, another thing too about the walk-around inspection, this is our morning inspection when we get done with our pre-shift safety meeting and we're ready to go to work. Somewhere in the neighborhood, 10 to 15 minutes, you should be able to do a good thorough walk-around inspection, check every vital component on that machine, and then turn around, put the power back onto it, and then get up in the machine and get ready to go to work. To get started, like I said, I'm left-handed. I like the left front. This is where I'm going to start. This is where I do my walk-around inspections every time. So starting off here, I'm going to look inside this area here. I'm going to look at those lift cylinders. And once again, we've had a lot of discussion about cylinders, right? So I want to keep a rag with me on any of my cylinders. So some of the things that I'm looking for are any damage to the chrome that's on the cylinder itself, but I want to keep a rag with me as well because dust will build up around that dust boot just on the inside of that cylinder right there. And I want to make sure I keep a rag so I can wipe that off, because as that dust builds up, what will happen is every time that cylinder goes in and out, I run the risk of taking a little bit of dirt with me every time. I can contaminate my hydraulic system, as well as I end up starting to have a leak there because of the dirt built up around that seal. So I'm going to look at the lift cylinders. I'm going to look at my pins down at the bottom where we bolt on and hook onto the blade. I'm going to look at any of my grease zerks up top, make sure there's no damage there. I'm going to look at any of the bolts inside here, make sure the bolts are all tight. I'm going to look at the back part of this blade. And what I'm looking for on the back part of the blade as I work my way out is we're looking for cracked welds. I'm either going to see a crack on that weld, or if I see a weld that's got some rust on it, good indication that I've got a cracked weld there and I'm getting some moisture in there. I'm also going to look for cracked paint. If I see some cracked paint, draws my attention to it as the operator to say, hey, maybe we got some structural damage here because I've got cracked paint on anywhere on there where we got into something, okay? I'm going to look at the back of the trash rack, and then I'm going to turn around once again. Look, I'm going to look at my push arm down below. I'm going to look at my pins. I want to make sure on the back side the bolts are tight for the pin keepers to keep them in place. Bolts up top here and down below. I want to make sure I can see all that and make sure that they're all tight. I'm also going to look from a safety standpoint as well. This gives me a good line of sight to see my handholds up on top of the machine. With a waste handler, we make those solid steel because waste being very abrasive, it's already a very harsh environment on the equipment. It's already hard enough to get up and down on that machine because of the debris where you could slip. So I want to make sure all my bolts, there's no damage to my handrails as I walk around that machine before I mount that machine. Now, as I start to make my way forward to the middle of the machine, a couple things I want to point out here too. I want to look at my steps. And you'll notice on the steps, once again, all of our waste handlers and our equipment, we've got this rigid design right here that allows me to put my foot there and allows me to get a good bite or good grip on that step as I were to mount that machine utilizing 3 points of contact, okay? Now, as I start to look at my undercarriage, I'm going to look at my pins. I'm going to look at all my bolts. I'm going to look at my rollers underneath. But I'm going to get a good line of sight and a good visual to make sure I don't have any loose bolts. I don't have anything out of place. I don't have anything wearing abnormally. I look at that carrier roller right here. I want to make sure there's no damage to the carrier roller. A lot of times, if I get a lot of debris built up on the carrier roller, it could seize up and then that track still continues to slide over the top of it. I'll create a flat spot. So I want to keep an eye on that carrier roller and keep my undercarriage clean, okay? I also want to look at the cylinder right here, make sure I don't have any leaks coming out from the cylinder there up there at the front idler. But as we walk along, you're probably looking too, going, what is going on with this string? Why do we have string on our tracks? String line, it's a great, easy, quick way for us to check the tension on our tracks. The biggest wear and tear on our tractors is our undercarriage. And the fastest way to wear out an undercarriage is either an undercarriage that's too loose or an undercarriage that has a track that's too tight. So what we need to do to check that as the operator, what I'd like to do is run that string line. You can get yourself a chalk line, whatever it is, but you need a straight edge. I run that straight edge where I got it hooked up there over the top, the highest point on the grouser, over the final drive. And then I've got it hooked down here, down below at the lowest point. What I want to do is I want to measure these 2 points because I have a carrier roller, so I have to measure the 2 sections. And I'm going to take the tape measure and I'm going to measure the lowest point on top of grouser to the string line. I'm going to measure the lowest part of the sag in between the carrier roller and the final drive. And then I'm going to do the same thing between the front idler and the carrier roller. And I guess it's right about there. So that measurement, that perfect measurement, should come out and average between the 2 sections at 2.5 inches. We're roughly running about 1 3/4 on this particular machine here. So right now, as I look at that track, good visual, that track is too tight. So I want to make sure I get in there and I want to adjust that track tension accordingly and get it back to where it's set. Now, where can I find this information if I don't know it? Well, it's in my operation and maintenance manual. It's in that white book that's behind the seat. Strongly encourage everybody to go back, take a look at it, and it's going to explain to me in detail how I can check my tracks. Now that I see what this looks like, when I get that back to being the proper tension, I'll take a look at it. I'll make a visual note. So now I know by looking at my tracks from here on out and what's too loose, or what's too tight. Okay? All right, moving on. We talked about our steps. Now I want to look at this trunnion and I want to look at the trunnion cap. Okay? I just want to make sure that it's tight through here. These will wear. So I got to keep a visual on that. I've got shims in here. So if they get too loose, I can take the bolts off, pull a shim or 2 out, and keep that tight. Okay, but it will wear down. Also inside here, very important to keep your undercarriage clean. I've got an equalizer bar that goes from this track to the center of the machine underneath and hooks over to the other side. I always want to make sure I keep my undercarriage clean so I can get a good visual in there and see if I have any damage to that equalizer bar and to see if it needs any fluid or if it needs to be greased, depending on the type of setup that it is. So, but I want to make sure that I have a good line of sight in there. Once again, working my way back, any loose bolts we've already talked about. I also want to look at the final drive here. Make sure I don't have any loose bolts. I want to make sure my sprocket segments, I don't have any damage to the sprocket segments. I also want to make sure that they're not wore down. They will wear down. I need to get to the point where when they are wore down, that's going to be something I'm going to write up, tell maintenance, and we're going to down that machine and replace those sprocket segments as well. Okay? As we move along right here, we talked about our ground level service center where we shut off our power. So a couple things inside the ground level service center. Number one, I got my hour meter and I got a little oval light on top of that hour meter. That's my wait to disconnect light or wait to shut off light. Basically what that's telling me is when that light's illuminated, that's telling me that I still have def in the lines and I need to purge that def out of the line. So that happens automatically. But when that light's illuminated, I can't shut that disconnect switch off, okay? Right here we have our, this is a D6XE. So this is an electric drive tractor. And this amber light right here, the round light, when that's illuminated, that's telling us we've got, the system is energized and we need to make sure before we shut it off that that light is out as well. But that's the system telling us the system's energized. I have my emergency shut off. So if I want to shut the machine off without climbing up into the cab, whether I got a fire on it, whether I've got fluids leaking out, I can flip that switch there, kill the fuel to it, and it's going to shut the engine down. We've got our block heater, and then also we have lights. So if I'm checking things out or doing a walk around in the dark, I can flip that switch on and turn the lights on to see when I go in to mount the machine. Okay, now we'll work our way back. Once again, we already talked about the undercarriage. This is a good opportunity for me to look at some of the other safety features. We talked about the handrail, the handhold as I climb up into the machine. I've got the halo bar going around the top of the machine. That's to tie off and hold on to when I'm up top. So we'll check that out as we get up top as well and see what's going on. So as we work our way to the back of the machine now, continuing on with our daily inspection, a couple things I want to look at as I get to the back here. Number one, I've got extra guarding in here to protect my duocone seal on my final drives. This gives me a good line of sight inside to see to make sure there's no wire wrapped around there. There's no trash or debris packed up underneath there to get into where we can cause damage to that duocone seal. I'm also looking down below at the bolts and the guarding on the pivot shaft as it goes in. And this being a waste handler, there's extra guarding inside there over that pivot shaft, over the duocone seals on the final drive. So good line of sight in there to see and make sure there's no damage. I'm going to look at the back part of the tracks, and you'll notice on our tracks with the waste handlers as well, this has a trapezoidal center hole here. We want that in the landfill because that's designed to not to have all that trash or debris pack up inside the undercarriage. Makes it easier for clean out and allows certain things to escape out through those center holes. So want to make sure we have those and keep an eye on those, as well as all the bolts on each one of those shoes. So as I step back, I'm also going to look here. We've got a ladder. This ladder is another great safety feature. The ladder here, got these clips. I can grab these clips, pull the ladder down. Gives me great access to be able to climb up, look at my fire extinguisher up top and inspect that to fuel the machine. And you know, I've got solid handrails here as well, so I can climb the ladder. I've got great access points to hold on to. Also, this has a fast fill system set up here. We do want to check that if our machine is equipped with the fast fill. Also, this spot right here, this is our backup alarm. We just want to watch out. Any spots that are open are really a great spot for whether it's a mouse that built his nest there over the weekend, or a bird or somebody getting inside there. But anytime, whether it's exhaust, whether it's anything inside that machine that critters can get in there and build a nest, we want to take a look at to make sure we're looking for, okay? As we step back, gives me a good line of sight to look up, see my lights and my integrated beacons up top on the cab. You can see the little light in the middle there. Also my reverse camera. Make sure there's no damage to the reverse camera. From a safety standpoint, it's a great safety tool inside that cab. Allows me to see outside that machine in this busy, chaotic environment that we're in waste. So I want to look up at that camera, make sure I don't have any damage. Gives me good line of sight here as well to see the clips on my fresh air cabin filter. So I want to make sure those are tight, and then we'll inspect those as we get up top. But right there, I can see them from the backside as I'm down below here. I also want to come in, I want to look at my fire suppression. The main thing that I'm looking for on this piece of equipment right here on the fire suppression is this little guy right here, this pin and this keeper. I want to make sure that keeper is in place. It doesn't look like much, but it holds that pin in place to keep it from working itself out. If that little keeper is not in there, it could work that pin out. I could hit a bump and set off the fire suppression just for the rough terrain of the landfill that we're in. So I want to make sure that that keeper is in place, or the plastic keeper ring is on there to hold it in. Also, I want to open up and look inside my striker box. We've got safety clips on the hinges for the doors to hold them open. Solid steel, very heavy. But mainly inside here is our fire suppression. Okay, we can put some tools, or it could be a toolbox. But the main thing I'm looking for is my fire suppression tanks. And I want to dust these off, and I want to look at that gauge right there, and I want to make sure that the needle is showing in the green zone. It lets me know that the fire suppression system's okay. Each tank has one. I just want to dust that off, make sure we're good to go on the fire suppression. Okay, that's all solid, tightened up. We got our pin for our hitch. Want to make sure there's no damage to it, and the keeper is in place. Why is this important? Well, as we get inclement weather on the landfill, trucks might get stuck. we might need to put a chain or cable on here to pull trucks out. So let's make sure we got our pin in there and there's no damage to it. Now this also gives me the opportunity to duck down below, look underneath the machine, and I can look directly across at a diagonal and see if I got any leaks coming down from my duocone seal on that side. I can turn the other way and I can look underneath and see if I got any leaks coming from the duocone seal on this side of the undercarriage. I can also look underneath and see if I have any fluids that are pouring out or any leaks coming out from underneath the machine. And then I just want to look at my striker bar all the way across and make sure there's no cracked welds, there's no damage to the striker bar, and nothing's out of place with the striker bar. Solid steel. This is going to keep that trash from coming up the track, and that striker bar is designed to knock that trash off the track as it starts to go up the track and forward on the machine. Another safety feature on this machine is we want to keep our undercarriage clean, right? We want to clean our undercarriage out at the end of each day so we can keep an eye on those vital components. This area right here with the clips, this is where I can put my spade or a shovel right here, put it in this bracket, and then hook up the clips and hold that in place. So I've always got a shovel with me at the end of the day when I want to clean out my tracks and make sure everything's staying clean. All right, now as we come around to the right side of the machine, a couple things we'll look at over here. Number one, same inspection I did on the other side of the undercarriage, okay? Loose bolts, anything out of the ordinary. Trunnion cap, make sure our steps are clear, free of any debris. The other thing I want to point out that we didn't talk about on the other side is checking the pivot shaft oil, okay? On some of the bigger dozers, as you recall, the pivot shaft tank is up by the door where I can get up and I've got a dipstick and an actual tank in there. On this 6, we have a different way to check the pivot shaft oil. And it's right inside here on both sides. But there's a little plug right there. I want to take a 1/2-inch drive, put in there, pull that plug out. My oil should be at the bottom of the thread. To properly check that, I got to do that on both sides of the machine. Make sure we know where we're checking our pivot shaft oil. And once again, I'll go back to and say, if I don't know where the pivot shaft oil is or anything about that machine, where to check a fluid, where to check a part, I can get it out of that OMM, that Operation and Maintenance Manual. That book is behind the seat. I want to make sure I take the time to familiarize myself with that book and this machine. I also want to look at my hydraulic sight glass, which is right there. It's going to tell me where my level of fluid is on that hydraulic sight glass. Continuing on with the undercarriage inspection, now I want to go up top here and I want to make sure we mount the machine using 3 points of contact. So up top here, I'm going to lift the door, and inside here, I've got my fluid check for my powertrain. Once again, as we've said before with a lot of our other equipment, it's double-sided. So make sure we're looking at the proper side of the dipstick to know whether it's a hot or a cold check. This says hot, low idle, and this says cold oil, safe zone. Make sure we're checking that on that powertrain. There's also a breather up top here, just like the other 6s and the 8. Want to make sure that breather is clean and not plugged up, so that way we're not causing any problems with that powertrain system. There's also the fill tube for the powertrain. And once again, I'll point out we have fluids to fill. Everything's color coded. So I know purple is powertrain, yellow is engine oil, blue is hydraulic. Inside here are our filters. I've got a hydraulic oil filter. I've got the powertrain filter. And then also inside here, we have the tab for our SOS port. This is where we're going to take our samples, send our samples in and get them checked out. So make sure those rubber boots are in place on those SOS ports and they're protected. Okay, as I step back, once again, I can look down inside. I can see my equalizer bar from when I'm up here. I can look and see if there's any damage. I want to check out inside the engine compartment. Once again, heavy duty enclosures. So I make sure anything that can get through the door can get through my radiator too, but we want to still be able to look in there, make sure our radiator is clean. I want to make sure that my thermal shields are in place. This is what's going to protect the heat from coming off that engine and potentially starting a fire as any debris gets inside that engine compartment. But basically, we're just mainly looking to make sure there's no debris or anything out of place, but there's no debris built up in there and there's no leaks. We've checked inside. Now I want to dismount the machine utilizing 3 points of contact. And now we're back on the ground. So as I get to the ground, I did my undercarriage. I looked at the push arm. I looked at my tilt cylinders. I'm looking at my lift cylinders inside. I also want to look at my hoses and make sure I don't have any leaks on my hydraulic lines. They're protected, but they're also in a very abrasive environment too, so we want to keep an eye on it. A couple things that might stick out to me from talking about leaks. If I see a spot on that machine that has a lot of dust built up in one spot, good indication I got a leak there because I'm getting some fluid on that machine and then all that dust is sticking to that fluid. So once again, that's going to draw my attention as the operator as I'm doing that walk around to that spot to say, okay, I got a leak here. Or if I look at those hoses in that area as well, if I see black marks on that yellow paint, that's a good indication to me that that hose is rubbing on there, on that tractor, on that yellow paint. So now I got to take a look at that and make sure I get that hose moved around to where it's not rubbing on that machine and potentially rubbing through. So I've looked at all that on the inside. I've looked at the cylinders here. Once again, reiterating, keeping a rag with us, wipe off those dust boots. And then also, as I look out, working my way out of this area, I want to look at the back of the trash rack. I want to look at the bottom of those lift cylinders, make sure the bolts are tight and in place. And then on the back of the trash rack, once again, looking for any cracked welds, looking for any bends, any damage to the back of that blade that's going to draw my attention and say, I've got a problem here. We've worked our way around 3/4 of the machine. Now the last part of the machine before we get up in the cab is going to be the blade. So some of the things I want to look at with the blade, once again, nothing different than what I'm checking out through the rest of the machine, but I'm going to look at the trash rack. I'm going to look at welds. I want to make sure I don't have any cracked welds or any damage. I want to look at welds on the blade and make sure none of them are cracked. Also, I want to look at my cutting edge. And I want to make sure, number one, my cutting edge isn't wore, but also I want to make sure the bolts are all tight. Now, little trick of the trade. As far as with the bolts, if these bolts have buildup and have dirt around them, then you know what? We probably don't have a problem. But if I got one of those bolts on that cutting edge that doesn't have any dirt built up around it, but every other one does, that's going to alert me as the operator, and as I'm doing my daily inspection, it's going to alert me to say, hey, I got a problem right there because I potentially have a loose bolt because I don't have any dirt or debris built up on it. Once again, working myself across, looking at each individual bar here on the trash rack, looking at the welds, make sure there's no damage. But it also allows me the opportunity to look through the trash rack and see if there's any damage to the radiator guard, see if there's any debris built up on the front side of the radiator. But it gives me a direct line of sight through there as well to kind of keep an eye on that. We want to look inside the engine compartment on the left side here. And once again, I'm looking for anything out of place, anything that's broke, anything that's leaking, any debris built up, but anything that just isn't right. Also, I want to check my engine oil. Dipstick is right here on this side. Now, once again, on our engine oil, with all the other dipsticks that we talked about as well, double-sided. I have a cold check, I have a hot check. So let's make sure we're checking the right side. Number one, we also have our oil fill, which is right there. And once again, it's color coded. So engine oil is yellow. Air filter, and you can see right here, I've got the dash line, which is a secondary ISO symbol, which represents filter. I've got the big arrow here, which is representing airflow. So this is telling me the symbol is my air filter. Lights, I got a light inside here. I can flip that switch. If it's dark out and I want to see inside there, I can turn the light on. I also have my sight glass inside there for my engine coolant. I got a good line of sight as I look at it from here. Another thing that I want to point out when we talk about stuff being out of place or abnormal, as I look over, I can see right here on the nozzle for my fire suppression, but I can see the cap for the fire suppression nozzle hanging down. I want to make sure that when I do see that, I reach down there and put that nozzle back on there and cover the end of that fire suppression lot line and make sure there's no debris or anything gets built up around that when it doesn't have that rubber boot or that protection over the nozzle. Now I want to walk over here and a couple things I want to look at up top here before we get in the cab and go to work. So I want to talk about right here, I want to talk about the DEF tank. DEF is very easily contaminated. So the least little bit of debris or dirt that it gets in it could break it down, could contaminate that fluid. Now, if it's contaminated, as it goes through the system, through the Cat emissions module, it could start to cause some problems and some alarms that are going to go off as far as with your regeneration system. So very important that we keep a rag with us, that we wipe this off and keep it clean. So when I pull that cap off and I go to fill that tank, I'm not going to contaminate it and I'm not going to cause other problems, okay? So number one, keep this area clean when we fill. Number two, there's a sticker right here and it's going to tell me based on the position of the gauge how many gallons it's going to take to fill this tank. So for example, this says at a half tank, it's going to take 4.2 gallons of depth to fill that tank up. So I've got that sticker that gives me reference there. Also, it's also telling me too, when I fill it and it gets to full, it's going to beep the horn at me twice to let me know that that tank is full. So I want to make sure we're aware of that. I got to have that power on to the machine in order to have that go off and alert me when that tank is full. So once again, keep it clean, don't contaminate the system. I've got my window washer fill right here. Another thing that we want to look at is our battery compartment. Once again, our batteries, possibly an ignition source when we talk about fires. So I want to make sure that I'm looking at this on a daily basis as well and keeping my battery compartment clean. So you can see, once again, this environment that we're in, very easily stuff gets inside there, it builds up. So we want to work on checking those out on a daily basis and keeping the battery compartment clean as well. And then I'm going to look over there and I'm going to make sure on that fire extinguisher that's mounted outside the cab, I want to make sure that clip is tight, that fire extinguisher is in place. Now that we've completed the outside inspection of this machine, there's a few things I want to talk about inside the cab. So let's turn our power on to the machine. Let's climb inside the cab. Okay, now we're going inside the cab. And as I continue on my inspection, a couple things I want to look at, right? Seatbelt is part of my daily inspection. I want to pull it out, make sure there's no debris, nothing built up on the seatbelt itself. And I want to look at the tag on here and make sure I see the manufacturer's date and then the install date. So this one here says manufactured January 24 and then install by January 2026. So that means I got to install that by 2026 in January, and I'll have 3 years from date of installation to change it out. I want to also look at the date that it was installed on the housing here on the seatbelt. So, and make sure we're within that 3-year window, because 3 years from date of installation is when I want to replace that seatbelt. So, with that being said, seatbelt looks good. I'm within my time of the install. No damage to the seatbelt. So now I'm going to sit down. I'm going to adjust myself in the seat, make sure I feel good and comfortable, you know, and get everything in place. I can reach the pedals. The controls feel good. So once I do that, now I'm going to hook up my seatbelt, because we never want to operate the machine without wearing the seatbelt. And then we're going to go ahead and get ready to start the machine. So I'm going to turn the key on. I hear the beep. That's running through its system. It's telling me, hey, we're checking everything out. Everything's good to go. So now with that being said, I'll go ahead and start the machine up. I notice right here as I start up, def line's not purged. C manual. So we did not allow that machine to purge is what's happening there. Okay. So let's quickly roll through our controls before we get into that monitor. Okay. A couple things. Over here on our panel, we've got our lights. We've got our high idle. We've got low idle. And then we have our bidirectional and then we have our forward and reverse speeds that we can set in independently. I call that bidirectional control, but you can see it pulls up on the monitor of speed control. So, looking at park brake, hydraulic lockout, and then we look at our key. We have our off position, our accessory position, and then our engine start. And then we'll notice over here on the orange, when I shut the engine off, it's going to continue to run. That's what we call the delayed engine shutdown. And we got our two-way radio on. So we'll go ahead and just turn that down for now. Communication, though, on the job site, most important thing. So very important to have the two-way radios on. And so anyway, when the engine continues to run delayed engine shutdown, when I hit the orange right here and override, that overrides the delayed engine shutdown. So now, otherwise, the engine's going to continue to run for a few minutes, reaches a certain ambient temperature, purges the DEF, and then will shut off on its own. When I go all the way over to the left, I override that. There was only two reasons why we would ever override delayed engine shutdown, and that's number one, if we had a fire, and number two, if I had a level 3 alarm that was happening on this machine. And those are pretty much the controls on the panel. Here's our left-right steer. Here's speed recall, this top button here. And then this is our speed set or speed control for our track speed. And then the switch down here is our forward and reverse. Over here on the right hand is our blade control. And then we also have increment, decrement for some other features here as we go through the monitor. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's talk about the monitor and some of the technology that's on the machine. Number one, I got on my screen here, I've got my engine coolant level or temperature. I've got my hydraulic oil temperature, and I've got my powertrain temperature. I know it's temperature because I got a thermometer there, and then I have the primary symbols and the secondary symbols. Over here on this side, we have our fuel, we have our DEF, and then these two guys right here are our main fall and our side slope percentages. And then this right down here below is our speed control or our bidirectional shift. This is telling me I'm one gear forward, and then when I hit reverse, I'm going to be in 1.5 in reverse. So let's look at, we already talked about our gauges. So let's roll through our monitor now and talk about some of the things we are. We have our quick reference monitor here on the side. Traction control, stable blade, auto carry, fan purge, steering assist, and bidirectional shift. Let's look at slope assist. I can look at slope assist, and we can change what we want with our increment, decrement of what we want that to be and where we're at on each side. So when I change that to the right, I can change it to the left. Over here, we can set different positions that we want our targets to be as far as our slope assist, okay? Let's go back to the camera. I can set that up to where I can see directly behind me in the camera and looking directly down behind the machine. The camera is good to allow you to see directly behind you. It still does not replace turning around and looking behind me and looking in reverse before I move in reverse. Okay, you think about if I hit reverse and then I start moving and I turn around and look behind me, it's going to be about 2 to 3 seconds before I would actually see behind me. So the camera is good to see if anybody's directly behind you, but I still want to turn around and look behind me as I'm operating that machine and moving it. Let's get into some of our settings. Our application profile. This is different profiles that we can set. We can go through, we can put an operator's name in there. You know, so basically, if I go through and decide, so let's go ahead and just roll through the machine and look at the different settings that I can put the machine in. I've got blade float enabled. I've got blade response standard. Standard is what comes out of the factory. Fine is very slow, is much slower. Standard is middle, and then fast, obviously, is fast. So those are the implement speeds of the blade, up and down. So you can set that to what works best for you. Blade quick drop, that's if I want to drop the blade. I got it enabled, disabled. That was enabled, so we'll leave there. Auto carry enabled or disabled. And then we have auto carry load factor. So auto carry load factor is if we're going to do it set this at auto carry. The higher that I have it set on the load factor, which means it's going to allow the tracks to slip more before it starts to raise that blade. The lower the sensitivity for that, then the less slippage of the tracks I will have. So that's our auto carry load factor, and then auto carry enabled, disabled. Steer assist, disabled. Blade steer, disabled. I can enable it. I can enable both of that. Custom bidirectional shift. That's where I want to change that speed control and go in. If I want to set that to 1.3, 1.2, 1.3 forward, I want my reverse to be slower, so I can set it at 1. I can hit OK. And then we go ahead and go back, and it changed that to a custom bidirectional shift. Fan purge. If I'm in a really dusty environment, like I am right here, I can change my fan purge duration up to 25, 35, 45 seconds, a minute. Let's do 48 seconds. So that means I'm going to reverse my fan and let the fan purge and run for 48 seconds. Obviously, the environment that we're in the landfill is very dusty. So I'm probably going to want to purge my fan a little bit more often than I would, let's say, if I was out on a general construction site that wasn't as dusty as what I am up here on the working face. Okay, so we'll take that back. Lights off. We can turn those on. Auto engine speed. We can set that 7 seconds. We can turn the reversing fan manual purge off. Now we can turn it on. So now I went ahead and just did a manual purge. I can see the light come on up there. So maybe it's still getting pretty dusty before my time is set for the machine to purge on its own or what I set it at. So I can go in and do a manual purge and reverse the fan and blow out that radiator. Traction control, low slip or normal. So if I want low slip, that's going to give me less slip if I set that on there. So now we have it set at slow. We're going to take it back to normal. But now all of these different settings that we rolled through, I can program, and then that's where I go back to the application profile, and I can hit save profile. It's got it all enabled, you know, what all set up to what I just programmed. I can save that profile, and then I can come back to it. So instead of having to go through everything, I can just come in, go back to that application profile, hit that, and all those settings are going to go back to that setup right there. If I decide I want to run the machine like somebody else or another operator, I can go back into their profile or that application profile, hit that, and it's going to take me to those settings. Okay. We did machine. Slope assist, main fall advanced. We have indicate. So that's just going to tell me what my main fall is. We have basic. And then we have the advanced. Blade slope mode. So we also have the same thing there. Indicate, basic. So we'll leave that at basic, but you can go through and look at those. Valve speed. I can change the valve speed. Right now it's 100%. If I feel it's reacting too fast, I can lower that and take it down. That's a low speed, raise speed. I got low speed, and then I've got tilt speed. Then we can set that at. Blade wear. I can go in and recalibrate this after I've used the machine for a while and my blade has got some wear and tear on it on the blade itself. We can go in, remeasure, and then come in and put those new measurements in there, so it's always going to keep track of what my blade wear is. And then your standard display, language, brightness, what type of units, clock set. And that's everything in that monitor from the settings side. Service mode, the important thing is the diagnostics. This allows me to see what codes have went off. It's going to tell me what the code is. It's going to tell me what level it was. And it's going to tell me what it particularly was. This one was after treatment 1, def dosed in lines, not purged. So basically, hadn't purged the lines yet. We turned the key all the way over to the left, and that gave us the def dose in lines and not purging the system. So it's going to keep track of that and let us know what codes are coming up in that machine. Here's our regen control. I can do a force regen or I can disable the regen. No need to ever disable the regen, but if I need to force a regen, maybe it's building up and I need to do a regen, I can do a forced regen instead of letting it do it automatically. Parameters, fluid monitor, it's just telling me what's happening with that machine. Steering bypass filter says we're not bypassing. Pump oil pressure, 380.3 psi. So it's giving me everything going on with that machine as far as pressures, fluids, percentages, telling me where my powertrain's at. Track speed direction, right now we're at 0. Selector duty cycle, 49.3%. So everything happening with that powertrain. Your steering, same thing. Steering control position sensor, 46%. Service mode disabled. If I want to disable it, I got to go in with the password to be able to disable that. And then information, key features. These are going to be our key features, and this is going to take us to an overview of what those key features are. Traction control helps the operator when acquiring a blade load by automatically limiting track slip. Slope assist. This is an overview. It has cat grade with slope assist, automatically maintains blade angle without needing an offboard reference or additional hardware. The system increases surface finish smoothness and reduces operator blade inputs. So, and it's going to tell me how to set this. Enter the slope assist screen by entering the menu button and then the slope assist tile. And it's going to walk me through the whole step of how to enable, disable the slope assist and how to efficiently work that. Reversing fan saves maintenance. Reversing fan saves maintenance time and improves the cooling system performance. Stable blade. Stable blade complements the operator's blade control inputs to help reduce small imperfections and produce a smoother finish. So stable blade's going to kick in and help the operator. The operator still has control over the blade, but if I hit a rough surface and I go up or down, stable blade's also going to kick in and help maintain and keep a level flat surface as we're blading. Blade load monitor allows the operator to periodically compare their current blade load compared to capacity of the machine. Blade load monitor will help achieve maximum blade loads. Steer assist, the machine will automatically command track steering and blade tilt to assist with the blade travel to follow horizontal guidance lines selected in cat grade and 3D display. And then our totals. We got lifetime totals, we have trip totals. Tells me everything I want to know what's happened with this machine. Total fuel used, total engine, total idle fuel. And that's everything in a nutshell in the monitor. Once again, step by step on the technology, I can walk through, see exactly what it's going to take to set that up, what that system actually is. The other thing that I'll really focus on is the operation and maintenance manual. Make sure we're going through, utilizing that operation and maintenance manual to know everything about this machine. The more I know about this machine and the operational standpoint and the safety standpoint, the safer I'm going to be out on the working face. And especially when I look at the working face and the amount of chaos that's happening out on the working face, the more I know about this machine, the safer I'm going to be. This down here is our decelerator. So as I kick up my RPMs, I push that down. That's going to reduce my decelerator. Here's my surface brake. And with that being said, we are now officially ready to go to work. I'm going to check out my area all around me, and then I'm going to make sure we're ready to go to work. Very important, too, to pay attention throughout the day and know what's going on with the machine, because there are blind spots as well on these pieces of equipment. So know and understand where the blind spots are.